Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favourite literary premises. So, a woman arrives at a house full of mysteries. It's clear that something a little bit strange is going on in this place and she is determined to find out what that might be. This is the premise of lots of different novels, and it's a premise that I really enjoy. And it's the premise of my own novel, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, which came out in hardback last year and is out in paperback this week. This is the UK paperback, and this is the US paperback, and the UK paperback is out today. So I thought it would be nice to make a video in celebration of Paperback Publication Day in the UK of The Secrets of Hartwood Hall. The US paperback came out earlier this week too. And I thought what I would do today is make a video about books about women arriving at houses full of mysteries, because I really enjoy A Woman Arrives at a House Full of Mystery novels. There are quite a lot of these books. It's a very old and very well-tested premise that I really enjoy, and that can go in lots of different directions and explore a lot of different themes. It's a very gothic trope, and I think most of the books I'm going to be speaking about today could be considered gothic in one way or another, and it's a trope that I really love. So I have gathered together 16 books, well, my own book plus 15 other books, which have as their central premise a woman arriving at a house full of mysteries. And I thought today I would just talk about them because it's a premise I really like. And I think if you like the premise, then there will be some books on this list that you might not have read that you might really enjoy. And also, I guess this is kind of a recommendation video for if you liked my novel, you might like these books too, and maybe a bit vice versa as well. So before I get into the other 15 books I'm going to speak about today, which the video will mostly be focused on, I will quickly talk a little bit about my novel, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall. So The Secrets of Hartwood Hall is, as I said, a book about a woman arriving at a house full of mysteries. And the woman in question in The Secrets of Hartwood Hall is Margaret Lennox. She has recently been widowed, and following her husband's death, she has returned to her old job as a governess. And she arrives in the summer of 1852 at Hartwood Hall, a grand, mysterious, half-closed-up mansion inhabited by Mrs Evesham, also a widow, and her little boy, Louis. Margaret Lennox is there to teach Louis, but it soon becomes clear that there are things going on at Hartwood Hall that she doesn't know about and doesn't understand. There are things she hasn't been told, and there are mysteries and secrets to be solved, and everything goes on from there. I had massive fun writing The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, and it's definitely a bit of a love letter to Victorian literature, including to a few Victorian books that I'm going to speak about next. One of my very favourite Woman Arrives at a House Full of Mysteries novels is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte from 1847. This is a wonderful Victorian coming-of-age story where we follow the life of Jane Eyre from her childhood into her young adulthood. Jane Eyre is an orphan and she has a difficult upbringing, outcast from her aunt and her aunt's family. She goes to boarding school, and after many years at boarding school and a few years teaching at boarding school, she goes away to be a governess at a place called Thornfield Hall. And when Jane Eyre arrives at Thornfield Hall, it becomes clear that there are some mysteries at Thornfield Hall, some things that she doesn't know about. She also encounters her new pupil Adele and her master, Mr Rochester. Jane and Rochester form a kind of friendship and everything goes on from there. I love Jane Eyre so much. I think it is a wonderful, beautiful, fascinating book with amazing dialogue and writing, wonderful characterization and such a great atmosphere. It is a wonderful Woman Arrives at a House Full of Mysteries novel. Sticking with the Victorians, I also wanted to mention Uncle Silas by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, which came out in 1864. In Uncle Silas, we're following a young girl called Maud. Now, Uncle Silas takes a little bit of time to get to the premise, but I don't think it is too spoilery to say that after Maud's complicated upbringing with a very scary governess, she ends up going to live at the house of her Uncle Silas. She hasn't met Uncle Silas before, and nor has she met her two cousins, but Uncle Silas's reputation does precede him because many years ago, a man died in his house. It was in a locked room and it was decided by the coroners at the time that it was suicide. But since then, there has always been a shadow over Uncle Silas because many people think that he might have had this man murdered. So Maud turns up at the mysterious house of, I think it's Bartram Hall, but I can never remember how to say it. And of course, Maud is going to end up getting caught up in all the mysteries and secrets that are going on here and finding out exactly what happened many years ago. Uncle Silas is a wonderful, rich, atmospheric novel. I love J. Sheridan Le Fanu so much. He is such a master of not exactly horror, but like within the gothic spectrum, definitely more towards the horror end. And he just writes fantastically. Maud is such an interesting character. There are so many interesting things going on here. This is one of those books that has just stayed with me hugely and I think about all the time, and I just really, really recommend it. Moving on to the 20th century, I also wanted to mention Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier from 1938. In Rebecca, we are following an unnamed narrator who at the beginning of the book marries a man called Maxim de Winter, who she hasn't known for very long. He is quite a bit older than her, and he was married before to a woman called Rebecca, who died several years ago. And when our unnamed narrator arrives at the estate of Manderley, she finds that Rebecca sort of figuratively haunts this place. Everyone from the servants to the neighbours to Maxim's family seem to have worshipped Rebecca, and our narrator feels that she just can't quite live up to her. But of course, this is a big house with lots of mysteries and secrets, and you're going to have to read to the end of Rebecca to find out what happened. I love Rebecca so much. I think it is such a wonderful, powerful, atmospheric, twisty-turny novel that is really, really tense, and the second half of the ending especially is so good. I also love Rebecca because for me it is very much a retelling, or at least like a book that is in conversation with Jane Eyre, and I really, really enjoyed the conversations it has with Jane Eyre. That's a really like special part of Rebecca for me, and I just think it's a wonderful book. Next, I want to mention The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson from 1959. Now, strictly, The Haunting of Hill House is very much about multiple people arriving in a house full of mysteries, but the two main characters for me are the two young women. So, you know, I think it works within this list. In The Haunting of Hill House, a scholar who is looking for evidence of supernatural ghostly phenomena assembles a small team of people to come and stay in Hill House, which has a reputation for being exceptionally haunted. So he gathers together himself and the future inheritor of the estate and two young women, Theodora and Eleanor. And Eleanor and Theodora definitely feel like the main characters for me, and I really, really enjoyed the dynamic between them and the close friendship with like heavy romantic undertones that develops between Theodora and Eleanor. Whether there are actual supernatural hauntings going on at this place, or whether it's just that this house has this gloomy psychological influence on anyone who comes into it, it's not really clear, but they're going to stay here and try and find out. I think The Haunting of Hill House is truly fantastic, but I also think it's the kind of book that, because it sounds like horror, and especially I think because the recent Netflix adaptation, which I haven't seen, I think is much more firmly horror. I feel like a lot of people who would love The Haunting of Hill House don't read it because they're expecting it to be too much like horror. Myself, I'm not someone who loves horror. I'm not someone who reads a lot of horror. I love gothic stuff, but if it goes too far into horror and gore, then I don't like it so much. Whereas The Haunting of Hill House for me is like, it's like cozy horror. The Haunting of Hill House has a real Agatha Christie feel to it. And if you like Agatha Christie and some ghost stories, then I feel like you will really enjoy The Haunting of Hill House. For me, it wasn't scary at all. Like, it's dark and grim and sad, but it's not scary. But it is truly fantastic, and I really, really, really recommend it. Moving on into the 21st century, I wanted to talk about Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. Sarah Waters is a real favourite author of mine, and she writes fantastic historical fiction. Fingersmith is set in the Victorian period, and it follows a young woman called Sue, who is a pickpocket and a thief. And she's persuaded at the beginning of the novel by a character who she and most of her friends just know as Gentleman. She's persuaded by him to help him out in a fraud that he is currently practicing. He's found a young wealthy heiress who he wants to marry, and he persuades Sue to come to this house and act as the girl's lady's maid in order to help persuade this girl to marry him. And Sue arrives in this house and everything goes on from there. I feel like I don't want to say anything else about the premise of Fingersmith because one of the amazing things about it is that it is very twisty-turny with a lot of massive twists and a lot of massive leaps that you don't expect in a really wonderful, pacey, fantastic way. This was the first Sarah Waters book I read, and it made me fall in love with her writing. I highly recommend her books, and I highly recommend Fingersmith if you like books about women arriving at houses full of mysteries. The next book I want to mention is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is a truly wonderful book that is probably my favourite novel that's not from the 19th century. I love this a lot and I think it's fantastic. So this book is a dual narrative, and we have women arriving at houses full of mysteries in both of the narratives. In the present moment of the narrative, we're following a young woman called Margaret Lee who has journeyed to the home of mysterious reclusive author Vida Winter in order to interview her and get her life story story for a biography that Vida has commissioned Margaret to write. So Margaret turns up at Vida's house, and this is very much a house full of mysteries, but in her research, Margaret also ends up going to the ruins of Angelfield House, where Vida grew up, and there are definitely plenty of mysteries in this ruinous house too. And then we also have, within the 13th tale, Vida telling Margaret the story of her life, which involves a mysterious house called Angelfield, and at one point, a governess does come to the house and tries to solve the mysteries within it. So 2 houses, lots of mysteries in different timelines. The 13th Tale is just a wonderful, wonderful novel in so many ways. It has everything that I love in a book, and it's one of those books that I feel like was just written for me. Like, it just ticks all of my bookish boxes. It's also a book that is very much about books and about the love of books and stories, and it's also got like the best twist in any book I've ever read, and I just think it's amazing and everyone should read it. The next book I want to mention is The Miniatus by Jessie Burton. This book is set in 17th century Amsterdam, and we follow Nella, who is an 18-year-old girl who has just got married to a man she doesn't know very well, and she arrives at his house in Amsterdam. Her husband is very distant, but he does give her this amazing doll's house that seems to have some kind of slightly supernatural power to mirror actual events going on in the house that she is actually in. And of course, this house that Nella is actually in is full of secrets and mysteries because, you know, it's in this video. I read The Miniatus quite a few years ago now, but I really loved it, and I do think it is well worth all the hype. It is a truly fantastic book with wonderful twists and turns, really great characterization, and lots of wonderful mysteries. The next book I want to mention is The Lost Ones by Anita Frank, which is set in 1917 and follows a young woman who is struggling to recover from the death of her fiance in the First World War, and she ends up getting sent by her family to stay with her sister, who is pregnant, and living in a mysterious house full of lots of mysteries. Stella soon finds that her sister Madeline believes the house to be haunted, and together they find out exactly what is going on in this mysterious place. This is a really fantastic ghostly tale with so many great elements. I really, really enjoyed it, and it's definitely one to read if you enjoy books about women arriving at houses full of mysteries. The next book I want to mention is The Quickening by Rhiannon Ward. This book is set in 1925, and actually we're again following a woman who has lost people in the First World War and is kind of struggling to get over that. The main character, Louisa, is a female photographer, and she's also quite late into her pregnancy and aware that her husband is not very keen on her working after the baby is born, so she ends up taking on one last photography job at the mysterious Cluer Hall, which is a strange place full of strange inhabitants which may or may not be haunted, and where a very famous seance was held back in the 1890s. And as Louisa starts to photograph the contents of the house for an auction, she gets caught up in all of the secrets and mysteries going on at Cluer Hall, and everything goes on from there. This is another really great atmospheric ghostly tale, and another one I definitely recommend. The next book I want to mention is Mrs England by Stacey Hawes, who is another of my favourite writers. This book is set in the Edwardian period, and it follows a young woman who is a nurse and what happens when she takes on a new position in the home of Mr and Mrs England. She's looking after these 4 children, and she's getting to know the master and mistress of the house, but it soon becomes clear that there's something a bit mysterious about Mrs England, and there's something that she doesn't quite understand. Mrs England is a wonderful, atmospheric, fantastically written novel with echoes of Jane Eyre. Stacey Hawes writes characters so well, and the twists and turns of the plot in Mrs England are just fantastic, so that's another one that I highly, highly recommend. The next book I want to mention is The Hiding Place by Amanda Mason. So far, my recommendations of books about women arriving at houses full of mysteries has been very, very historical focused, but The Hiding Place is set in the contemporary world, and we're following a woman called Nell who arrives with her husband and stepdaughter at their holiday cottage, where they're staying for the next few weeks. But there's something a little bit odd, a little bit mysterious about this cottage, and Nell and her stepdaughter and various other characters who live in this town start to get caught up in the secrets of this house, and everything goes on from there. The Hiding Place is a wonderful, tense, atmospheric novel that I really, really recommend, and I also think it's a great example of the fact that you can do modern Gothic so well. You know, a lot of the Gothic fiction that I read does tend to be historical, but you can do wonderful Gothic fiction set in the modern world, and The Hiding Place by Amanda Mason is a really great example of that. While we're on the subject of fantastic gothic books set in the modern world, I have 2 novels to mention by C.J. Cook, one of which is historical and one of which isn't. So I'll start with the one that isn't historical, and that is The Nesting. In The Nesting, we're following a young woman called Lexi who has conned her way into a position as a nanny for a man called Tom, looking after his 2 girls at Tom's very newly built home amongst the forests of Norway. Lexi comes to this house with many secrets of her own, but the house itself and the surrounding landscape also hold secrets. We know that Tom's wife has died, and the circumstances around her death are a little bit mysterious, and there is something odd and creepy about this place. One of the things I love about The Nesting is that it is set in this really, really modern, newly built house that feels so gothic and so creepy. And I feel like C.J. Cook, again, like Amanda Mason, is really showing in The Nesting that you can do modern gothic so well. And I just really love that about this book. As I said, though, there is another book I wanted to mention by C.J. Cook, and that is The Ghostwoods. The Ghostwoods has a dual timeline narrative, but both quite close together. So one in the 50s and one in the 60s. And we're following 2 women a few years apart who arrive at the same mother and baby home in the Scottish borders in order to give birth in this sort of private home that has been opened up for young women who are pregnant outside of marriage. But this place, Lycan Hall, is quite weird and strange things are going on, and there are lots and lots of secrets and lots of mysteries, and slowly as the book goes on you get to see how these 2 different women's lives line up. I love The Ghostwoods so much. It is very, very sinister and creepy in a really fantastic way. Also, if you're someone who enjoys like creepy gothic mushrooms, then you'll definitely love The Ghostwoods. There's lots of that in there, and it's just a really fantastic, rich, wonderful book. Then finally I have 2 2024 releases to mention, one of which is out already, one of which is not out yet. So here we have The Beholders by Hester Musson. This came out back in January, but I read it towards the end of last year, and it was one of my favourite books of 2023. I just thought it was incredible. So this is a historical novel set in the late Victorian period about a young maidservant called Harriet Watkins, who arrives for her new position at Finton Hall to find that the house is a bit strange. There are definitely a few secrets and mysteries here, and the mistress behaves quite oddly. And we know from a newspaper article we get on the first page that 4 months after Harriet Watkins starts working here, the mistress of Finton Hall will be accused of murdering her own infant child. And we follow what happens in the run-up to the death, and also what happens afterwards. And I just loved The Beholders so much. I feel like this book is very twisty-turny and didn't go in all the directions I expected it to, in a wonderful way. I thought it was so rich and so tense, like a real thriller of a historical novel. And I loved how this book kind of really showed up all the like seedy, grimy stuff going on beneath the polished veneer of Victorian life. I just thought it was incredible, and I highly, highly recommend it. And then finally, I wanted to mention The Library Thief by Quickening, which is coming out in April, I think. Yes, in April, so pretty soon now. And this is another great work of historical fiction set in the Victorian period about a woman arriving at a house full of mysteries. What a surprise. So this book is about young Florence, who, after she is chucked out of her father's house, intercepts a letter to him. He's a bookbinder and she's been working as his apprentice, and she intercepts this letter and takes it upon herself to turn up at the house of one of his clients and say, "I'm here to rebind your library." So she ends up staying at Rose Hall to rebind the library. But Rose Hall is a strange place. There are very few servants, and the master has been behaving oddly since the death of his wife, and Florence becomes intrigued to find out exactly what's going on at Rose Hall. One thing I will say about The Library Thief is that I feel like it is a novel that starts off as a woman arrives at a house full of mysteries novel, but it very much turns into a coming-of-age story that is more about kind of identity and Florence learning more about herself. And although the kind of solving of the mysteries is still an integral part of this book, it does kind of take a bit of a backseat in the second half. But I really enjoyed how The Library Thief takes certain elements of the woman arrives at a house full of mysteries trope and story and kind of turns it on its head. Although having said that, I do feel like all of the books I've spoken about today very much involve the protagonist finding out more about themselves through finding out more about the houses that they are inhabiting and the secrets within those houses. And that's something I love about these books a lot. So there we have it. Those are a bunch of books about women arriving at houses full of mysteries. Do let me know if this is a premise that you enjoy in books as well. And if you have any more recommendations for me of books that begin with a woman arriving at a house full of mysteries, do please let me know because I love them. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.